This video is sponsored by Elsword. Elsword Online is a free-to-play online action RPG that uses a classic side-scrolling mechanic which features a unique combat system that has a very arcade-like feel. The game has recently gone through a reboot which includes various class changes and skill balancing and has added several abilities for all class paths. Overall, the combat system in Elsword is a blast and I think it offers something for everyone. Check the link in the description for more information. Welcome everyone to the official Holy Paladin PvP guide for patch 8.2. You guys have been asking me to update my Paladin guide, so here I am doing so. Now, like all of my guides in the past, we'll be going over our general talents. I will cover our PvP talents. I will then quickly hop into stats and gearing, and then I will also cover our Azerite traits and the newly implemented essence system. And then I'll go over some general comp strategies, comp suggestions, tips and tricks, things along those lines. Now, because I've done a lot of Holy Paladin guides in the past, I'm not going to spend too much time covering things that I've covered in the past. If you want some more info, if you feel like there's something lacking, I'll have a written guide posted by Wowhead in the info box below. I will also have a link to my previous Holy Paladin guide in the info box below. And of course, I will also have some timestamps for the video if you feel like you want to skip around. So going right into our general talents first, we have two options here that you're going to be playing in PvP. You have Crusader's Might. That's primarily going to be used in 2v2s, or if you're playing melee wings and you think that you're going to be getting trained, and Bestow Faith as your general go-to talent. Bestow Faith is the safe option, is a low mana cost heal with a short delay on the effect of the heal. You're going to be using this if you're a new paladin, someone starting out and you're not very comfortable with your class yet. But if you feel like you're going to be getting trained, or you are playing Avenging Crusader and you think you're going to be getting a lot of Crusader strikes off, then Crusader's Might is excellent because your cooldown on your Holy Shock is going to be reduced significantly, which means you're going to be getting more Holy Shocks off, which means more effective healing. And it's great if you're getting trained by like a rep paladin or a hunter in 2v2s and you want that extra healing, as Bestow Faith will not provide the same amount of healing when compared to Crusader's Might. Crusader's Might will provide a lot more healing, but again, you have to be getting off tons and tons of Crusader strikes to make this worth it. I play this a lot in 2s, sometimes in 3s, but if you're a beginner, Bestow Faith is the go-to. Now for level 30, all of these options are viable. If you are a beginner, I recommend Cavalier because Cavalier will give you more mobility, which will allow you to get out of situations where you shouldn't be in because you have poor positioning. If you're also at a low rating and you notice that double melee comps are always training you and the games end rather fast, having more mobility will be preferred there. Now, if you're worried about getting swapped often or swapped too often, where you feel like like you're playing a rogue mage and you want a shorter CD on your wall, and you think that, hey, I'm not going to be able to get away from these guys as easily, mobility is not going to help me, but I do want a shorter reduction on my wall, and I do want a shorter reduction on my bubble. Now for Rule of Law, it is actually a very strong talent. It is a 30-second cooldown with 2 charges on it. It will increase your range of your heals by 50%, so not only will you have 40% range on your healing, you will have up to 60% range on your healing. And additionally, it will allow you to get more benefit out of your mastery. Your mastery, known as Lightbringer, increases your healing based on the proximity compared to you and your target. So if you activate your Rule of Law, you're going to be benefiting that, and it's going to be increased by 50%. The reach of your Rule of Law, the reach of your Lightbringer, your mastery will be increased by 50%. So you can sit back from a long distance when your wings are down and you don't want to be in melee range. You don't want to be anywhere near the enemy because you are worried about getting swapped to. You can use Rule of Law outside of your wings to benefit from your mastery and get way further healing than you normally would. So from over here, I maybe only heal this guy, all the way to this point over here. I'm no longer able to heal him as he's out of range. But if I activate my Rule of Law, I can now heal him from all the way over here. Now for level 45, Fist of Justice is going to be your go-to. Every time you throw out a judgment, it's going to lower the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice by 10 seconds. This is very effective in almost every single scenario. So if I Hammer of Justice this PvP training dummy and then I throw out a judgment, you'll see that my Hammer of Justice cooldown has been reduced by 10 seconds. You want to be throwing out judgments all the time due to your Azerite traits. We'll get into that in a little bit, but you want to be throwing them out to reduce the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice and deal additional damage. And if you're playing melee wings or Avenging Crusader, you're going to be healing during that time duration as well, using that judgment. So throwing out judgments, reducing the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice is very important, especially if you're playing Rogue Mage Pally. You want that Hammer of Justice to be up as much as possible. Repentance is decent sometimes in comps where you feel like you do not need additional stuns. You feel like you already have enough stuns on your team. It's very effective in 2v2s versus Mistweaver Monks, and Blinding Light is not that effective. It's decent sometimes if you feel like all of the CC gaps are already being filled. So if you feel like you do not need additional stuns, and you feel like you do not need, you know, anything that DRs with Sheep, which would be Repentance, you can play Blinding Light. It's sometimes effective. However, it is a long cooldown, and I recommend if you are a beginner to master Fist of Justice, get very comfortable throwing out those judgments, and then mess around with the other ones. But primarily, Fist of Justice will be your go-to. Level 60 is easy. You will always be taking Devotion Aura. It is a solid damage reduction talent, and while you activate your Aura Mastery, you'll be getting even more benefit out of your Devotion Aura. You can read the tooltip. It's just great overall damage reduction, and is the most effective talent for the level 60 bracket. Moving on to level 75, you will always be taking Holy Avenger. It increases your haste by 30% and your Holy Shock healing, which is a lot of your healing, by 30% for 20 seconds. And the reason why you want to spec into this is it is your gap filler outside of Avenging Wrath or your wings. Having a Holy Avenger to use and weave in between your wings is a great way to stabilize your healing, and a lot of the time people struggle with healing outside of their wings. That is what this talent is for. Now for level 90, you have two options. You have Sanctified Wrath and Avenging Crusader. If you are a beginner, you should always be playing Sanctified Wrath. You should always be playing regular wings. When you get more advanced on the class, no matter what anyone says, I recommend then you try and mess around with Avenging Crusader. Avenging Crusader is great for additional pressure, and depending on the essence that you're picking, which we'll talk about a bit later, it is a decent way to be mana efficient. The healing is very effective if it does proc from your Vision to Perfection. If I'm losing you there, don't worry, we'll cover it later. But it does cost 10,000 mana to activate, and sometimes it is difficult to use, and in some cases you don't want to be pushing in and activating this because you will get caught in a bunch of CC or get shut down on it. And maximizing your range is always the safe route. Staying at a distance, coming in when you need to for the Hajj, and then staying outside using your regular Avenging Wrath is the safest route to heal as a Holy Paladin. And if you are a beginner, that is where you want to be at. You want to be maximizing your distance, playing Bestow Faith, playing Sanctified Wrath, and benefiting from regular wings. If you feel like you need the extra pressure, maybe you're playing RM Pala, if you have the correct essences and you're experienced and you think, hey, it's time to step it up, I want to try something new for some fun or for some additional damage, Avenger Crusader might be your go-to. Now for level 100, you can almost always take Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose is so effective with Glimmer of Light. It is an Azerite trait you'll be taking later. Do not worry about it right now, but it is going to pretty much give you a 20% chance to get a free Holy Shock or a free Light of the Dawn. As you can see, it procced right there, my Light of the Dawn. I can use it again, and sometimes it'll proc on your Holy Shock as well. It's very effective for additional damage. It is very effective for additional healing. However, you can mess around with Bestow Faith sometimes when fighting against a Shadow Priest and you want that spread healing. Bestow Faith is not a bad option. It allows you to put your beacon on two separate targets, and that is nice when sometimes playing against comps that have a lot of spread pressure, specifically Shadow Priest, but you do not have to take this talent. Some people will always opt to play Divine Purpose, so just try both and see what you prefer. Now moving on to our PvP talents, you will almost always be taking Gladiator's Medallion. It is the most effective choice here. It is the most reliable choice here. I rarely would ever swap out of this. You can sometimes play Relentless if you are playing a human and you feel like, you know what, Trinket's not really helping me here. I'm eating massive CC chains. This is sometimes good versus comps like with Shadow Priests and even Warlocks where the Trinket won't help you and you're already getting fear spammed, and you feel like if you Trinket something, you're just going to eat another CC. So reducing the overall amount of CC you take is pretty effective. And if you are a human, you do have your racial every man for himself to break out of stuns when necessary, but Gladiator's Medallion is almost always the go-to. Now for the rest of these here, Light's Grace is almost a guaranteed lock-in for me. I love this talent. It just basically makes it so that my Holy Lights just straight across the board heal for 50% more. Holy Light is your greatest source of healing, and when you do cast consecutive Holy Lights, stacking up to 3 times, you reduce the damage that target takes by 5% for 8 seconds. So if I use Light's Grace and I'm Holy Lighting myself over and over and over again, I will get this buff and it will stack up to 15% damage reduction. You want to be spamming out Holy Lights pretty consistently when you can to build up this Light's Grace buff, and it's very mana efficient, right? You're reducing the damage they take, which means you have to heal less, and you are getting a benefit of increased healing from your Light's Grace because of its just baseline 50% increase. So I love Light's Grace. You almost always want to take it. I don't think I've ever swapped out of it, almost ever. It is my preferred choice. Now for the rest of these, there are some situations where you can swap around. Blessed Hands, this is great in 2v2s, great in 3v3s. Sometimes you need that freedom to get across the map. Sometimes you need that freedom if you are getting trained. And Blessing of Protection is not only a defensive ability, but it's also an offensive ability. So if your teammate gets stuck in a kidney shot or a storm bolt, you can use your Blessing of Protection to break them out of that CC to allow them to stay on the target and secure a kill. You can also use that Blessing of Protection to allow your allies to get cast off if they need it. So it's very effective to almost always have Blessed Hands. However, if the team has a ton of purges, maybe you're fighting a Shadow Priest and having a bop isn't very effective, having an extra freedom isn't very effective, you can swap out for things like Divine Vision. Divine Vision is amazing versus Shadow Priest. You almost always want to take this because it reduces all of the damage they essentially do by 15%. So it's very effective for Shadow Priest, but outside of that, I don't really mess with it too much. It will also extend your aura, which is great for your devotion aura, and just for the fact that they're going to be, receiving 15%, a 15% reduction on shadow damage. So it's very effective. So usually when I swap out my Blessed Hands, it might be things for like Divine Vision. Like I said, Light's Grace is almost a lock-in, and then you have two other options here, or a few other options here, and we'll go through the scenario. So Ultimate Sacrifice is usually a lock-in for you depending on the comp that you're fighting. If you're fighting something like Rogue Mage and they have a ton of burst, if you're fighting or playing with a Fire Mage and you want to make sure that your Fire Mage does not proc their Cauterize, that is one of their last line of defenses, or you're trying to save them from having to use their Ice Block, giving them a 100% damage reduction or a transfer of 100% damage to you in a form of a dot, mitigating all damage they take, is extremely effective, right? You are pretty much making them immune to taking damage for a period of time, and that's going to be great for preserving things like Ice Block, preserving things like Cauterize, or if you're fighting a team in 2v2s and you're fighting a Rogue Mage and you know that you just have to make sure that your teammate doesn't die and you'll win the game, having things like Ultimate Sacrifice is very effective there. However, if you're fighting a very rot heavy comp, sometimes you do not have to play Ultimate Sacrifice, because Ultimate Sacrifice, when you do spec into Ultimate Sacrifice, it is no longer really going to be used as a CC break because it is a major defensive. If you're not spec'd into Ultimate Sacrifice, and let's say you're playing something like Divine Favor instead and you're not using Conflict and Strife, which is an essence, we'll get to that later, do not worry. But if you are playing something like this, you can use your Blessing of Sacrifice to break out of things like traps, sheeps, and other CC abilities, right? If somebody goes to sheep you and you use your Blessing of Sacrifice on your ally, you will take some damage that they are receiving and that will break you out of CC. However, if you're playing into Ultimate Sacrifice, you might not want to use that because that is a major defensive that you're just using to get out of CC. Now, if your teammate is about to die and you're going to get put into a long CC chain, then of course use it there. But if you're just trying to break out of CC, wasting your Ultimate Sacrifice on that target, your Blessing of Sac when spec'd into Ultimate Sacrifice, it's not going to be, the go-to. So I wouldn't recommend taking that, and you're not worried about one-shot damage. You don't think that you want to prevent one-shot damage. Usually if I'm fighting Death Knights in 2v2s, or if I'm fighting, like any Rot comp or like a Shadow Priest, I'm probably not going to be taking Ultimate Sacrifice. I'm probably going to be taking something else. So that's one thing to consider. Also, if you are struggling with Death Knights and you're already playing Conflict and Strife, again, we'll get to that a little bit later. So again, if we were playing Conflict and Strife in our major slot and I get Divine Favor for free, I have one extra talent and I don't want to play something like Ultimate Sacrifice. Again, this is 2v2s, right? What would I play? You have a lot of options here that you can play. Probably the two primary ones for 2v2s when fighting against a Death Knight, you can play something like Avenging Light. This is going to give you additional damage or extra damage, free damage, when you cast a Holy Light on a target. This will deal a lot of damage. There's been games where I've used this and I get like a 90,000 Holy Light cast off. It is 90,000 healing, 30% of that 90,000 will be dealt as damage. So that is a great form of dealing damage to targets around you or the target that you're healing. You can also play Hollowed Ground, which is actually extremely effective. Every time you cast your Consecration, you will break out of all slows and snares. So if you're getting Chains of Ice spammed, you can just pretty much spam your Consecration, which costs 0 mana to get out of that slow, so you can save your freedoms for other scenarios. If you're running away from the Death Knight around the pillar and you're getting chain spammed, you can keep just dropping a Consecration, breaking that slow, making him spam out those Chains of Ice, which is going to take away from his damage because he's going to be having to spend his runes to slow you rather than deal damage. It's very effective in those scenarios. So just keep that in mind. There are some fun talents here, primarily for 2v2s, those being Avenging Light and Hollowed Ground. The rest of the talents here, I usually never take. Cleanse the Weak, I've tried a few times. It's horrible versus rogues. Anyone that tells you Cleanse the Weak is good versus rogues, in my opinion, it feels like such a wasted talent option, right? I'd rather take Hollowed Ground, or I'd rather take something like Avenging Light if I want to spec and do, if I'm using Conflict and Strife, or I'd rather play Ultimate Sack here, okay? I would never really spec into Cleanse the Weak, even versus Shadow Priest. I mean, Shadow Priest, it is kind of effective if you're dispelling everyone within your aura of the same effect, so things like Shadow Word Pain or Vampiric Touch, it is decent there, so you can try it out there. But versus rogues, even Death Knights, I pretty much never take this talent, but that is my personal playstyle. So in quick summary, your general talents and PvP talents will look something like this. You can swap out, obviously, any of these depending on the scenario. You could play Melee Wings if you want. You could play Crusader's Might if you want. Your PvP talents will almost always look like this. Obviously, if you're playing something like Conflict and Strife, which gives you Divine Favor for free, you can spec into Ultimate Sack, or you can kind of mess around with the other options here for your third PvP talent, depending on what you're fighting for fun in 2v2s, 3v3s. Experiment a little bit. I recommend you try out everything, see what works best for you, but generally everything will look something like this. All right, quickly hopping into gearing and stats. You're looking to get above 20% critical strike chance. Anything below that really sucks. It's going to feel pretty bad. So having above 20%, 20 to 25% crit chance is what you're looking for. Anything above like 14, 15% haste is what you're looking for. Anything above 20% haste is probably way too much. So between 15 and 20% haste is what you're looking for. And then you're trying to get above 30% mastery. Personally, having more mastery, I think, feels better because sometimes you are playing up in the opponent's face, and getting more healing for free is a great way to be mana efficient and just have more effective healing. And then versatility is always just a bonus. If your stats are above 20% crit and you have a decent amount of haste and your mastery is looking solid, versatility is always just a bonus. Now, going into Azerite traits, you're essentially looking for two primary Azerite traits, obviously. Number one is going to be Indomitable Justice. Indomitable Justice is going to increase the damage of your judgment significantly, which is very effective if you are playing Avenging Crusader or your Melee Wings, because the more damage you're dealing with your judgment, the more you're going to be healing. But it's also great because most of the time you are playing the talent known as Fist of Justice. And when you throw out those judgments, consecutively or just consistently, you're going to be dealing more damage on those, and you're going to be essentially reducing the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice. So that is pretty important there, and I recommend you are always looking to throw out those judgments. So having Indomitable Justice is great for having an execute. It's great for additional healing if you're playing Avenging Crusader, and it's just great to throw out extra damage and keep the pressure high for your team, depending on the comp that you're playing. But it's almost always the best Azerite trait. Now, the second best Azerite trait, or depending if you're more of a conservative player, the primary Azerite trait, especially for PvE, is Glimmer of Light. Glimmer of Light is going to give you free healing on your Holy Shock. It's going to give you free damage on your Holy Shock. If I use my Holy Shock on this guy over here, and then I were to Holy Shock this PvP dummy several seconds later, you're going to see that it's going to heal this ally as well as deal damage to the dummy. So you're going to be spreading out damage, spreading out healing. It's effective for stopping drinks, and I believe it's the best Azerite trait for PvE in general. So getting your Glimmer of Light trait, stacking 3 of those with 3 Indomitable Justice is going to be your go-to. But there are some scenarios where you get some bad Azerite traits, or you have some other Azerite traits and you do not have 3 Glimmer, 3 Indomitable Justice. Another really great one to take is Light's Decree if you are not playing Melee Wings. If you are not playing Avenging Crusader and you're playing Sanctified Wrath and you have regular Avenging Wrath, if that is the case, you can spec into or select Light's Decree. Although it is a Retribution specialization for an Azerite trait, it will still work for your regular Avenging Wrath. when you activate Avenging Wrath, Light Decree will give you 5 seconds more on your wings. So it will last an additional 5 seconds, which is great for conservative healing, beginner players. Having 5 seconds more on your wings is great for dealing additional damage or providing additional healing. Avenging Wrath is the most powerful healing cooldown in the entire game, I would say. It's probably the most powerful cooldown in the entire game. So having that, I would say, is a great option if you're never going to play melee wings, or if you do not have Indomitable Justice and you have one of these available. It's pretty effective in those scenarios. Another decent Azerite trait is Radiant Incandescence. It is like a I would say a somewhat weaker version or a less reliable version of Glimmer of Light. Your Holy Shot criticals now deal additional damage or additional healing over 3 seconds. It's still a great one if you get a piece of gear that does not have Glimmer of Light, but it has Indomitable Justice, like this piece of gear here. Radiant Incandescence is a fine second option. So again, Glimmer of Light, Indomitable Justice, that's what you're looking for. You can also get Light's Decree, and then you can also even grab Radiant Incandescence if you're unable to find one or the other Azerite trait when it comes to Glimmer of Light and Indomitable Justice. All right, now to the exciting stuff, the new essence system. I get this question a lot, which essences you should play. So personally, what I found and from what I've watched from other players use, there are a few different options that you can pick up. So you want to look to try and get your minor essence slot, which is at your neck level being 55. Once you get neck level 55, it does kind of open up the ball game and allow you to try out a bunch of different essence combos. So the primary essences you're going to be looking for to acquire is Conflict and Strife, which is pretty easy to get right away. You're looking to get Crucible of the Flame, which is the first one that you acquire. Vision of Perfection, which is from Mechagon. And then you also want to try and acquire, which I don't think I have on this character yet, is Memory of Lucid Dream. These are the 4 essences that I would recommend you have to mix and match depending on the game which you're fighting. But the general lock-in for me has been Conflict and Strife as my major, because it gives me a free PvP talent, and the talent that it selects for you or automatically is given to you is Divine Favor, which really opens up my PvP talents, right? I can have Divine Favor with Conflict and Strife as my major essence in my neck. I can have Ultimate Sacrifice, Light's Grace, and Blessed Hands. Having those 4 PvP talents are by far the strongest PvP talents for a Holy Paladin, and having all of those for essentially free is extremely effective. And then for your minor slot, I like having Vision of Perfection. I have rank 2 vision currently, and that reduces the cooldown of my Avenging Wrath, my most powerful cooldown, by 16.5%. So something like that is a solid combo, reducing the cooldown of my wings and then getting Divine Favor for free. Another option that you could have is putting something like Crucible of the Flame in your major slot, but this is only effective if you have rank 2 or higher. Rank 3 is great. If you have a 61 neck and you have rank 3 Crucible, that is amazing. That's a lot of free damage and a lot of free healing. If you only have rank 1, this talent, or this essence, I should say, is kind of doo-doo. This essence is not very effective at rank 1. Now, the last combination I want to talk about here is one that you're going to see pretty consistently in tournaments and even other players using. If you are not spec'ing a Conflict and Strife and you do not have Vision in your minor, one thing that you will see players use is if they have Memory of Lucid Dream, which is pretty easy to get. This is just my ult and I don't have it yet. You'll put this in your minor slot to be more mana efficient, right? Your spells and abilities have a chance to refund a specific amount of mana every time you spend mana on an ability, whatever. That's great to be mana efficient, but you'll see Paladins use Vision of Perfection as their major slot. And when they do this, they are often spec'd into Avenging Crusader. The reason they do this is because when you get this random proc on your wings, if you are spec'd into Vision of Perfection, it gives you a chance to activate your Avenging Crusader or your Avenging Wrath for 35% of its base duration, depending on the rank that you have. It could be less, it could be more. Rank 2 is 35% of its base duration. And it will also, lower the cooldown of your wings, which you could already get from just putting it in your minor. But if this were to proc in the middle of an arena, activating your wings costs 10,000 mana. Not the most mana efficient. But if you get a proc for free for having Vision of Perfection in your major slot, it's very mana efficient because one judgment will top your entire team. Sometimes I've gotten procs for my Vision of Perfection 3 times within 1 minute. I mean, it's back-to-back procs. And that is so clutch, but it's a lot of RNG involved. See, right now I just got a proc, and if I were to throw out one judgment, that judgment would heal my entire team to almost full HP, and that cost me no mana. So it's really effective in those scenarios, and you can try that, but just almost always the go-to if you're not going to play Crucible Flame for fun is going to be Conflict and Strife in your major slot and Vision in your minor. So really quickly, I'm going to be covering your general like rotation, some tips and tricks on the Holy Paladin. I've done this so many times in the past. I'm going to put a link to an older guide where I went really in depth on this, and I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but I will cover it quickly here. So a common question that I get is Avenging Wrath. Outside of that, Stoops, outside of my wings, I heal for nothing. When you have Avenging Wrath up, you can heal through any amount of damage, and you want to be pairing this ability with similar like offensive enemy ability. So things like Abomination from a Death Knight, you want to be activating this. Vendetta, you want to be activating this from the enemy. You want to be pairing this ability with strong offensive CDs, and that way you can easily heal through them. You don't want to be activating this ability for fun. Like, you want to be activating it when you actually need to activate it to make sure that you can, you know, withstand the long-term game. A long game requires you to be smart about your CDs. Outside of this, you have a lot of extra healing and damage reduction abilities that people don't consider. So the number one thing that you want to use to kind of hold you off until your next wings is your Holy Avenger. Holy Avenger gives you 30% extra haste, and it gives you 30% extra healing on your Holy Shock. That is a lot. I mean, my Holy Lights are way faster, and my Holy Shocks are healing for a ton. So outside of that, you can rely on this CD that lasts for 20 seconds to hold you off till your next wings. When you do not have this up, or you've used it, for example, and you're still taking a lot of damage, your basic rotation is, you know, number one, using Holy Shock on CD to look for an Infusion of Light proc. Infusion of Light is a basic Holy Paladin passive that all Holy Paladins have. When you crit on your Holy Shock, it procs Infusion of Light, which reduces the cast time of your next Holy Light by 1.5 seconds, or it increases the healing of your next Flash of Light by 40%. You are never going to be using the Flash of Light proc. I mean, anyone that uses that, it's usually a mistake, because you're not getting your Light's Grace, which is 50% increased healing, and you're getting that 5% damage reduction buff depending on how many times you've casted that Holy Light. You're never going to be using that. You're always going to be using the fast cast Holy Light. Flash of Light is rarely ever used, and we'll talk about that in a second. So you're always going to be trying to fish for these Infusion of Light procs off your Holy Shock. So using Holy Shock on CD is pretty much your number one priority. If you're playing Bestow Faith, you also want to be using this pretty much on CD. It is a low mana cost heal, the least mana expensive heal you pretty much have as a Holy Paladin, and it is essentially free healing, so you want to be using that. Outside of that, you know, you want to be using your instant cast, especially if you're playing things like Sanctified Wrath. You want to try and get procs on your Light of the Dawn. Holy Shock, obviously, because you're going to be fishing for your Divine Purpose. I mean, you're just fishing for procs through your instant cast. Outside of that, you want to really rely on Holy Light, but there are going to be times where you don't have time to, you're not getting procs on Infusion of Light, right? You're not getting any fast cast Holy Lights, and you have these slow Holy Lights that you have to cast. Outside of fishing for those and not getting procs, you can use your Light of the Martyr if you feel like it's necessary to try and keep your allies alive, right? If you need to get some instant healing out, there are going to be times where you're going to be spamming out your Light of the Martyr to try and keep somebody alive in really bad situations. You're rarely going to be using that, but there are scenarios where you will be using that. So I rarely press this button, but I'd rather press it than use Flash of Light, because Flash of Light costs a lot of mana, and the healing that you get from that is not very effective. So I'd rather use my Light of the Martyr if necessary, if I do not have a Holy Shock up, if I do not have a Light of the Dawn up, if I don't have a Bestow Faith up, and I have no procs on my Holy Light. So the goal is to get someone up to enough HP so that I can just spam Holy Lights when they're stabilized to be mana efficient and build up my Light's Grace buff, right? I want to be doing this. This is what I want to be doing. Weaving in my Holy Shocks, getting fast cast Holy Lights, using my Bestow Faith, my Light of the Dawn, and just maximizing my Light's Grace buff by keeping it up and spamming out Holy Lights. And to ensure that I'm able to do that, I want to use things like Light of the Martyr, and if I do not have any major CDs up and Light of the Martyr is not working, it's not being effective, you can always rely on a Blessing of Protection. You can always rely on a Blessing of Sacrifice. You can always rely on Aura Mastery. If you pair Blessing of Sacrifice and Aura Mastery, that's 50% damage reduction on that target. That's like a pain suppression. It's extremely effective in those scenarios. So you can rely on damage reduction. You can also rely on using your Hammer of Justice. By throwing out judgments consistently, you're going to be reducing the cooldown of your Hammer of Justice, and that's going to allow you to apply CC onto the enemy healer, which will then cause pressure to the enemy team, which will then alleviate some pressure from your team, because then you're going offensive and they have to play defensive. And then use this simple rotation till you can get back to a Holy Avenger or an Avenging Wrath. And that's all you're doing, is you're using your instant cast. You want to get to a place where you can spam out Holy Lights. If they're too low and this cast is too slow and you have nothing else to press, I mean, there I got a proc, but if you're in this scenario where you have nothing else to press and you don't have Divine Favor or anything else up, then you can use your Light of the Martyr. So that's pretty much the rotation, relying on your damage reduction, relying on your instant casts. If those don't work and you can't spam Holy Light, then you can use your Light of the Martyr and then get them to a place where they're stabilized, where you can go back to just spamming out Holy Lights, just slowly keeping the person stabilized. Now, really quickly, when do I use Flash of Light? When I use Flash of Light is only when I would use Light of the Martyr, but it's on me. So if I'm about to die and I have nothing else to press and I can't even run and I have no bubble, I have nothing, and they're on me and I need to do something for myself, then I'm going to use my Flash of Light. But I rarely press that ability. It's pretty garby. It's worse than Holy Light by far. It's so mana expensive, and as a Holy Paladin, you want to be mana efficient. Again, that's a lot of info. If you have more questions about your Beacon of Light, just make sure that you always have it on the primary target that's taking damage. You know, if you have any more questions, I have a guide that goes through a lot of other stuff that I might have not covered, but it's just a lot of info for one video. The link to that will be in the info box below. Be sure to check it out. Now, to end this video, what comps can you play as a Holy Paladin? The best comp that you can play is Fire Mage, Assassination Rogue, Holy Paladin. By far the strongest comp, but you can play any 3v3 comp or even any 2v2 comp as a Holy Paladin. You are one of the strongest and most well-rounded healers in the game. You can play with anything. Walking Dead, Windwalker DK, TSG, that being Arms Warrior DK, Holy Paladin is extremely effective. You can play Shadow Priest, Destruction Warlock, Holy Paladin. You can play Ellie, Elemental Shaman, Destruction Warlock, Holy Paladin. You can play Fire Mage, Arms Warrior, Holy Paladin. You can play any comp as a Holy Paladin. That's why they're one of my favorite healers. But if you're looking for the best comps in 2v2s and 3v3s, the best 2v2 comp for a Holy Paladin is probably going to be Holy Paladin Death Knight, that being Unholy. And the strongest 3v3 comp is going to be Fire Mage, Assassination Rogue, Holy Paladin. Now, again, I know that was a lot of info, but if you have any questions, you can let me know in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you guys as soon as I can. If you're looking for your own inexpensive, personalized coaching, you can check out my Patreon page in the info box below. It is the most inexpensive coaching anywhere on the internet, and that is a money back guarantee. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know by giving it a thumbs up once again, and don't forget, if you have any questions, you can let me know in the info box below. You can also check out my live stream at twitch.tv/Stoops_TV for any other questions that you may have. But that will do it for this Holy Paladin guide, and I'll see you guys next time.